Welcome back, everybody. This is a much awaited episode of the Hope Axis, my new podcast. I'm sitting here with Emma Acker, who is a death doula. And we will talk today to you and in your company about what it means to die and whether we have somehow as humanity forgotten about the lost art of dying, what it means to be present, what it means to face our own mortality and that of those we love or those we've never heard of, but somehow the news cycle carries their sad or celebrated end to us. Obviously, this podcast is about hope. I started it because I got really frustrated with this trend in public discourse where I found that high-achieving people, highly collaborative people who are clearly very hopeful and optimistic, otherwise they would not have their illustrious careers, nevertheless start talking about life and themselves and the world as if there was no hope. I felt there's some kind of dissonance there, some kind of maybe even intellectual dishonesty to keep all the hope for yourself and not share it. I always felt in my work that whatever hope, whatever encouragement, whatever optimism I have to give it back kind of double fold to our audience, to the next generation, to people who might just be getting started. To me, that's basically the best thing you can do with somebody else, make them a little bit more empowered, a little bit more encouraged, and then help them through their journey however you can. I do believe that there is no hope without understanding that life has a beginning and an end. Emma, you have this unique and incredible profession, being a death doula. I assume that most of our audience would have heard about doulas, these incredible people who are there in the moments of birth to provide emotional, physical support, and sometimes medical support to the woman undergoing this beautiful process. And, we know from literature and old movies or from our older relative stories that there used to be a thing that was just being there with those dying. Adults, before these incredible innovations that make our lives more comfortable, healthier, and longer, people used to die all the time. So I'm 40 years old, a 40-year-old woman in 1823 would have experienced, either she would already be dead, but she would have experienced the act of dying numerous times in her life, often in her own home or even in her own bed. In a Huxleyan way, the modern individual does not have to face death personally, usually in the West, that much head on, unless they work in the medical profession or in some other ways, in some very, very, niche segment of society. And so your work counts as incredibly exotic and new, despite the fact that it's one of the oldest things that humans, or even maybe whatever came before humans, would have invented. So Emma, welcome to the Hope Axis. We will face death here for the next hour and talk about how you, you and I have had multiple conversations, and I know that you did not, start out as a 10-year-old thinking, I'm going to be a death doula when I grow up. So how did this happen to you, and where does your interest stem from?
Thanks for having me so much, Anna. Really, I was one of my very good friends who is now gone, but she was my first roommate here in New York City. And she was 60 at the time or thereabouts. I was 17. And I lived with her my first year of being here in New York. We became very good friends and remained friends over the next 30 years. And so I was visiting her fairly often in her late 80s, early 90s, and began to see that she was declining. She lived alone. She's defiant, awesome, Bohemian Greenwich Village woman, and fantastic person who lived alone. She had a son and they saw each other a little bit, but I realized she was declining. And I visited her and began visiting her like much more often, once a week or something like that, and then maybe twice a week. And I realized I did not know what to do. I did not know what this looked like. I had not seen my grandparents die. I had never had death around me at all. And I hated the feeling of not knowing what this thing was.
The powerlessness, right?
Yes, powerless.
Incompetent in the situation.
Right. Thank you. Not only not being able to recognize in her, my dear friend, what is going to take place, but also out there, out the window in New York City, where do I go for help? What resources are available? How does it work? I didn't know. And, I thought, gosh, this doesn't feel good. This feels actually stupid. I felt stupid. And I realized I didn't know anybody else that knew what to do either, who was my age, my stage. We're all sort of waiting for a crisis, I guess. And so it was really sitting there with my friend and being part of walking alongside her that I realized this is a big problem. And not only personally for myself, but perhaps in culture in general. Also, I realized, I wanted to know, why don't I know? I am part of different communities, different organizations. It's not talked about there either. So it's not anywhere sort of a remembering of how to do this for ourselves in whatever communities we're in, so that we can be there better for not only our families, friends, but for culture at large. So I kind of Googled, is there such thing as an end-of-life doula? I really did. And this was about 2018, 2017. And sure enough, at that time, there was one big organization that was doing in-person trainings, and I read more about it and considered it and decided to go do it. I have to say, real quick, that it was being with my friend and watching her that brought me to Googling. But back when I have 3 kids, when I was, birthing them, I did have birth doulas, and it popped into my mind at that time, but then went deep down back inside me. Why isn't there something like this at the other end of life? There should be, because you're so happy to have someone who knows who you are and knows where you live and how you do things at home, and can sort of advocate between home and the institutional settings you might have to be in. And so that was probably one of the little beads on a string that led me to looking at this work. And then I would be remiss if I did not mention that my husband also, when my children were very small, he's fine now, but he had cancer and had to go through treatments and recovered. But just coming up, boom, like that, to the logistical nightmare that can be existential and also just emotional. All these things led to me looking into this space and going, what's going on? There's a gap here. And so that led me to doing the training, and which is, several days and a lot of pre-work. And then you go and you can volunteer and do practical work at a hospice. That's what I did anyway for about a year until COVID hit. And then I can tell you more about what I did. But that's how I got started.
Training entail. So if I decide on Tuesday when I go back to New York City that I want to become a death doula, I mean, we know I have actually 2 very good friends who are professional women who volunteer as birth doulas. And I mean that I understand what goes into the training there, but what about dying? What's a death doula?
It's a great question, Anna. And there's a lot of different doula trainings that have sprung up, especially in the last few years. The end-of-life doula movement's been going for, I'd say, since the early 2000s, really, and grown a lot of steam lately. It's about 40 years behind the birth doula movement. But really, in the last few years, and I'd say this is probably since COVID, there's been a big explosion of trainings and things that have popped up. So there's a lot of different things out there, but I can speak to the 2 trainings that I took, and one was in real life and one was online. And so it's a lot of practical understanding of what happens in general to a human being as they go through the dying process, the general pattern of things, So this is not a medical position. End-of-life doula is not medical. We're support in practical, emotional, spiritual, logistical ways, but not medical. So it's not, a full-on medical training, but it is an understanding of what to recognize, what to see, the signs, and what's normal, what's not. so that you're able to sit there, be there, support people as they're watching their loved ones go through it and say, you know what, this is part of it, you know. So there's the practical side, and then but prior to even getting to that, I'd say a lot of the pre-work that you do before you go to a training is thinking and reflecting on your own experiences with death, if you've had any, and thinking about your own mortality, like really going there and thinking, if I found out X, how would I respond? How would I want if I had all the choices in the world, how would I want my end days to go? You know, thought experiments like that. And also you do a lot of work on, you know, sort of keeping up to date or having no leftovers in your life as far as people you want to say, I love you to, thank you to, forgive me to, please forgive me, I forgive you, you know, that kind of unfinished business kind of work. So, you know, you're not going to do all that, but at least begin to understand that is part of the process of entering into the training of a doula, is doing your own work first, so that you at least have touched on the areas that, you know, you begin to do your own work so you can be there in a grounded way for another person well.
Was there something that surprised you about yourself as you were facing these questions? I mean, I imagine that even before the training, you would have contemplated and reflected on this, but I'm sure that both during the training, when you're confronting those questions, and then actually being there with people, person after person, as they say their goodbye to the world, was there something surprising that you think you know now that you didn't before about yourself?
I think, yes. Well, I'd say the questions of where would you like to be? I've moved a lot in my life, and I'd say the place that I would like to be is probably not where I'm going to be able to be. And so it brings to mind, no, it's okay. It brings, because you know what? Here's the reality. We don't get what we want all the time. And I think this is a big part of this subject, is we can think about what we would like and dig into why, and really go there in our minds and imaginations and seek out what it is about that place, about that memory, about that time that can really serve you well, even if you can't make all this stuff happen in real life, right? So, I mean, that's a whole topic. But yeah, so where I'd like to go, where I'd like
to be realistic about it. And also, yeah, you know, I can imagine that just like with weddings, some people have kind of unrealistic expectations of what their relatives will be able to produce on the spot in that emotionally and financially very difficult moment, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about grief here. We're talking about small griefs along the way, and then the big grief of the death itself. But I think that's what we're doing in some of this thinking is, what are you grieving? What are you wishing you had, but you don't? What are you wishing you didn't have, but you do? And that's what suffering is, right? I don't have what I want. I do have what I don't want, and dealing with that inside. And so it made me dig deep and think about things that I miss or long for, people. But then to turn around and see people in my life right now, one of the exercises I had to do is called the Stanford letter writing project. And it's a way, you can look it up, it's online. It's an excellent exercise in which they have a number of prompts, and you don't have to do all of them at once, and you're not necessarily sending these letters, but you're, writing a letter to someone or however many people who you'd really feel the need to thank or forgive or tell them that you love, And this sounds very simple, but when you actually sit down and really get quiet and think, if I were writing this because I know I'm about to die, it can be a very weighty exercise and awesome. But writing those kind of things to people that are in your life right now, I mean, you're really practicing accepting and thinking about the fact that you are mortal. And it's a reason to sit still and sit with that. And yet think about a relationship that you're in, not just sit with your own self, but think about those to whom you are related. And I think that is a very important part of this whole process.
I really would like to talk a little bit about the act of dying before we actually talk about how, kind of puzzled the environment around the dying person can become under this shock. And then go and talk a little bit about the relatives and the people that are expected by society to take care or look after the dying person. And then we can talk a little bit about the administrative, lack of knowledge that most people have. I just lost my father, and it happens very fast.
Oh, I'm
so it was 6 months ago, but even older relatives of mine that I would have thought, had enormous experience before, nobody knows. And even if, I don't know, my uncle had lost somebody, 20 years ago, they forget. It's not something you want to remember.
Right.
So it's almost like every time somebody dies in the family, everybody starts from zero. And I get to really having the doula there is also kind of a warehouse of knowledge, right, in that moment, because of the continuity that, for you, the professional aspect of the work represents. But before we go there, obviously we can't do a full death doula training here on this podcast.
Right.
But I would love to, is there kind of a standard process of dying starting at the moment when you get involved? Because I can imagine for some people that's a very long process. Like somebody can have a disease for 10 years or even longer and then eventually deteriorate, or, a 100-year process, which is called life, So,
yeah, exactly.
Getting involved, right? Can you guide us through the most, the basic kind of flow of events from the moment that the family contacts you and says, Emma, we need you. Come.
It's a really good question, Anna, because people contact you at very different points in the process. Okay. So, but let's just say, this has happened. Well, actually, none of mine have been the same. But this is one version. Somebody in the family receives a terminal diagnosis, or they've had one and they've reached the end of their curative possibilities, and they're facing this big transition from cure to care only, i.e.
What was basically an almost intellectual challenge of battling something and finding perseverance, and you have to put that type A modern way aside and retreat to the timeless basics.
Yeah, so you've had a team probably. Let's just say you have a great team, you've been working with doctors that you've come to know, and you've, had longer than you imagined you would because, say, you had a bit of this or that. Your family, obviously everybody is dealing with a lot because there's anticipatory grief and everything. Everybody's lives have changed, especially the one closest or the caregiver to the person who's diagnosed. There's been a lot going on already, but then this big, fresh news that can sometimes feel very fresh and very difficult comes, where there is nothing more that we can do. And you know what? In some ways, sometimes that never gets said, or it's alluded to, but there's always something else you can try. So there's something about knowing that someone's been very clear that there's nothing more to be done. And so there is a decision made to go simply to comfort care. And that would mean often you bring in hospice care. And if you could be at home, there are places in New York, several, where you can be in-house hospice, but really it's often home care.
Okay. But is it better to know? I think you said something so important here, and we have an incredible interintellect community member and an author called Razan, who is a surgeon in Canada, and she deals with people sometimes with, cases, especially of cancer, where you perform the operation and it didn't work.
Yeah.
This beautiful piece about hope, like to what degree is, and it's kind of pertinent to this podcast, and to what degree is the doctor kind of endowed with this obligation to provide hope. Like, and she talks about a specific case in her piece about somebody where it's really 50-50.
Right.
The survival rate. So what do you say? But I think what you said is even more extreme, which is kind of the old way of doing things, right? And sometimes it used to be even very gendered. Like, let's tell her.
Yeah.
And we talked about this with like 2003, space shuttle catastrophes. Like, should we tell the astronauts or should they die happy? Do you think it's better? Like, what a power does the family have if the family knows that somebody is going to die, but they don't? How do you think it's easier for you to enter the process if the person knows?
Oh, yes. This is a very good question. And I would say culturally, all cultures are very different about this. Okay. Some people, you do not say anything, but speaking about being here, Western, us here in the States, I mean, you hear about all the time. Yeah. Who's reaching out to an end-of-life doula? Sometimes it's the person who knows they're dying, who is dying. Sometimes it's family members that need support being alongside their person. And the special person who's dying doesn't know that the end-of-life doula is being brought in. And that's okay, but I would work specifically with the family members as support, but not right in there in the room with the dying person. I'm there to help sort of be support.
Sometimes people ask you to deliver the news. So that
No. What I'm saying is this. There are different ways that an end-of-life doula can be involved. And what I've experienced is sometimes a grown daughter or a son reaches out to an end-of-life doula because they've heard of them and they want support as they are supporting their father or mother or whatever. The father or mother don't want anything to do with the doula.
They are the clients of yours.
Exactly. And so there's that kind of support. But your question is about, should you tell someone? I think, and that's a very big question. And if someone is not wanting to talk about it, not wanting to know, not wanting to go there, it is not the role of the end-of-life doula. I mean, if the family's brought an end-of-life doula in and the dying person doesn't want to acknowledge that they're dying, the doula may be called something else to them. Maybe it's just this person's here to support you and keep you company or whatever. That's not my role to break down a form of denial. It is, no, I'm not there I'm there to support the dying person where they're at, and then perhaps separately be there for the family who's dealing with having to care for this person, and yet they're, and also very difficult situation of not being able to even discuss the reality of the situation with their family member. So it's like you'd be companioning the dying person, but then working with the family in a different kind of way to help them all get through this process together. But there's a really great book that came out fairly recently by a Dr. Sammy Winemaker and her colleague called Hope for the Best, Plan for the Rest. And they discuss this way of walking sort of two roads at one time. We are absolutely wanting the best, and yet at the same time must have in the back of your mind, if not that, then we all need to do this. And it's difficult, and you toggle back and forth, and it's, so in some ways I see the role of doula, end of life doula, is I'm walking with, my role is to keep in my mind's eye the fact death is the end of this. How we're going to get there, I don't know, but that is where we're walking, and how to walk well alongside these folks and support them in the right way, both with practical helps, thinking things maybe one step ahead about logistical helps, not advising and not, bossing everybody around, but walking alongside and helping navigate that time. I hope that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. That's incredible. So you arrive, and already your arrival is unique in each of these cases, right? You mentioned so beautifully, and I'm sure a birth doula would say something similar, that no two births are ever the same, no two deaths either. And so you arrive already having kind of set the scene by the nature of your arrival. Who reached out? What is the relationship of this client to their own death, or this client to the death of somebody in their family or close to them? Now, what happens after that? How do you... I'm sure there is an exploration process there, because so much of what you will be providing depends on what you find in the room. So what usually follows? What's the next step?
Well, I think it's a careful conversation with, say you're dealing directly with the dying person, and are able to have, they know who you are, they know why you're there, and they're happy to speak to you, right? Let's just say that. Then it really...
The ideal scenario that I would...
Yeah, the ideal
not
scenario.
always there.
So honestly, a lot of it is letting them know why you're there, and asking them, finding out who they are, asking them about themselves. I mean, tell me a little about your life, just basically saying, I'm not here and viewing you as just a person who's dying. Like, you're a person that has lived a full life. Let me know a little bit about yourself, and tell me, and then eventually tell me where you are right now. Like, what is going on? And I mean, look, it's a conversation, but you're finding out how are they perceiving the point they're at right now, and how would they like things to go if they had things the way they wanted? Where do they want to be? At home or not? Where would you end up liking to be when you die? Do you want to be at home? Would you prefer to be somewhere else? Those kind of questions. Who do you want around you? You can start getting
difficult, because maybe somebody wants to be there, but the dying person is like, no.
That's right. So these kinds of questions. And sometimes, you will find out it's better to have that conversation just one-on-one. This is the beauty and maybe difficulty sometimes of having a third person in the room, third party, in the room, is that you can hear directly from them, the dying person, what they hope and want, and are able to, keep that plan, that desire front and center with the rest of the family as things get tricky and perhaps difficult.
And you represent the dying person, and they have to be honest in front of the other person, because they don't want to hurt them, or maybe they don't have a relationship that's really grounded in honesty, right?
Right. That's right. And so, and working through emotions, working through the dynamics that can pop up with family members, the one that's there and caring, around the clock, and then the one that perhaps swoops in and doesn't like how things are going. But it all depends, you see. If there were clear understanding earlier, further upstream as to how things are to go, what this person is willing to go through, what kind of measures they want or don't want. If everyone's clear on that earlier on, it's a whole lot easier, right? But oftentimes we don't talk about these things. And so there's a lot of question marks and personal viewpoints that can become difficult. And that is where I think a doula can be helpful. clearly, also, though, I must say, you have your medical professionals, the palliative care doctors, social workers that are also, trained and brilliant at doing this. But a doula is at home and can see a family in a different way than, say, in a doctor's office, and so can be a very much a complementary help, I think, helping synthesize information, helping be a sounding board for how people are dealing with information, and then perhaps bringing these concerns back to social workers, palliative care doctors, sort of as a unit. The doula can help with that.
And do you interact with the medical team? And if so, how do they doulas? Like, what's the relationship? Are they happy to?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm talking over the top of you. Yes, it depends. It depends. I'm there. I think what you discover is that there's a lot of, specialists in the medical field, and they're amazing. And then there's the family or the dying person and the person taking care of them, loved ones. And there can be siloed bits of information. Everyone's doing their job excellently, but the information is coming from several different places, and having, like I said, sort of a way to synthesize what's coming in, to sort of talk about it and soundboard it with the family, and then go back and ask questions as a sort of advocate. It doesn't mean the doula is speaking for the family, but they can help sort of collate the information or the questions the family may have and then go back. I have been involved in that way. Some people don't want that, and that's totally fine. But some do. It depends. It depends so much. And a lot of the work that I do too, I do with private clients who have loved ones and families, but I also work pro bono for people that are unhoused. And so becoming very much an advocate for people that don't have anybody within the medical system. So yes, in that case, I do a lot of listening and synthesizing of information with the person themselves who's sick, and helping ask questions that they're too overwhelmed to think about themselves.
Or maybe they have a deep distrust of the medical or any institution.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Experiences throughout their lives.
Right.
Is this like denial, anger thing even true? Do people actually go through those stages?
Oh, neatly like that? No. Maybe, but most of the time I think it's a bit of a spiral.
Yeah.
Yeah. Things come around. People talk about being afraid. I think a lot of people are afraid of pain, and fair enough. And afraid of the dying process more than perhaps
being dead. Yeah.
So it's more, what am I going to have to go through? And I don't want to be a burden, and, money, and just all the different stressors.
Yeah.
And so, that is part of what can be an end-of-life doula's work too, is to look at these different areas and help think through ways to navigate through those things. Will you, arrive at nirvana with somebody where they're not afraid at all, and you see these kinds of things, and that's awesome.
I know, but like DMT, right? I know, I read
Yeah. But it's not neat and tidy.
Yeah.
Not neat and tidy. And I think that's a big part of this role as doula is, I sometimes think of it as a grounding rod, is that you're there to you're absorbing sometimes. Maybe that's not the correct way to put it. Maybe end-of-life doula world will tell me off. But you're sort of creating a place for a lot of the energies to go, and staying clear and listening, and not trying to fix it.
Yeah.
A lot of these things cannot be fixed, but you're there to support and bear witness and stay.
In our great problem-solving culture, you enter after it has been concluded that the problem can't be solved.
Yes.
Talk about a unique job, right?
Right. And
one in society, in the entire job market, actually not trying to solve a problem. It's the moment of humility, right? That whatever you've done in your life, you might be an unhoused person, with an advocate, direly needed. You might be a very wealthy person in Manhattan with the best care. And there's a fantastic moment in the book Fleischman is in Trouble where the liver doctor hero has a kind of a side quip in his mind that it's even more difficult in his experience for wealthy people to accept the fact that their relative will die because they're used to their money solving all the problems. And don't. I mean, you can probably freeze yourself, right? And but what else are you going to do? That's in religions. This is there's one way in which we are all equal. We are born and we die.
Right. I have a acute care nurse practitioner who works in the emergency ICUs and here in the city. And I mean, New York City of all places is a remarkable place for this kind of thing, right? Right in the ICU, there's a very, very wealthy person and a homeless person very close to each other going through similar things. So yes. I mean, I think I think our deepest need is to know that we are connected relationally with another human being. Doesn't mean someone's there staring at you as you die, but it means you're not alone. You know that somebody knows where you are, loves you, and is bearing witness and paying attention to your life. And I think bearing witness, entering a space without the way to fix it, but the ability to, support and navigate through the most difficult times, pointing out this is normal. Okay, let's go, see if we can do something about this, but in a calm way and taking the time, being available in a way that is not on the clock, in the same way that some of these more specific roles have now become. Here's the thing, hospice is amazing. The thing is that hospice teams are with you in your home probably about an hour and a half, once, twice, maybe top 3 times a week. So you think you're going to have wraparound support from, you do in some ways, you can call in and ask questions, but actual people there with you, it's not what you might imagine. So you need people. We all need people at the beginning of our life, and we need them at the end. And I think that's the big thing that is hard to imagine for ourselves, especially in society the way it is right now sometimes, for some of us anyway.
So as we move kind of closer to the act of dying, I'd like to kind of go into other forms of inequality that might exist between two people dying. And the first thing that come to my mind is age. So, we can die at any age, sadly, right? From the second after our birth until, if you're a Japanese lady in the countryside, you might be 121, right? Because you're very healthy your whole life. So talk to me a little bit about the different ages of dying and how that might change your work and also how the relatives behave in that situation.
Thank you. This is a very good
There seems to be I was joking with a friend that these days, if somebody dies at 80, we are like, oh my God, was there an accident?
I know you are right.
The kind of accepted age of dying keeps being delayed. So I'm curious also whether you see a change there.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to be clear and honest with you. I have not had to attend as an end-of-life doula a person who is younger than 30. Okay, that has not been my experience yet. So I cannot speak to that. But I think you are right in that we, even myself, as we get older, but also as the world changes, we do think, 75 is not old. 85 is not even old. Like 90 maybe. Where does this idea come from? So, but
okay, because she smoked, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So there's. I mean, why is that the case? Why is that the case? That's another whole podcast. But because we're perhaps not around people older than us very much. We are not around people consistently who are older than us. Like it was the visiting week after week of my friend, which made me suddenly go, oh, because I saw it, but I am not necessarily around people older than me on a weekly basis. So it's in my mind now because of this work that I notice things like that, but otherwise I wouldn't. So I think that's part of it. I would say, the signs and the pattern of dying, of course, look different. I guess we don't want to see them. We can't believe that they're happening when they're in somebody who is younger than what we would imagine a person's age should be when they die. But the people that I've worked with who have lived a large number of years on the street, definitely, it ages you 20 years at least. So people in their 40s look more like they're in their 60s. But the wherewithal to stay out of the hospital system is so strong that they often resist any kind of care like that until the very, it's absolutely like going in an ambulance because you just have to. You fell down and you didn't get up and you need to go in. So I think I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but
it was very different when you have grandchildren or great-grandchildren versus, say, you have two young kids. And it's sort of going to be missing out on seeing them grow up.
Absolutely. Yeah. The griefs, the inability to be there, and what you feel you will miss out on. All these things are huge things to work through. And that is, and to want, but so many people, I've been around and also heard, you want life around you. You want your little ones around you, but you need people to help take care of them, of course. So there's, the whole aspect of community and what does that mean? Where does help come from? That is not the specific medical specialized help, but, relationships that you have with others. Where does help come from when you find yourself vulnerable, unable to produce anymore, unable to be in the role that you were in and imagining you were going to be in for quite some time? To be able to speak honestly about that, to even let it out, I think can be a great help. And, so that's where, that is where a doula can be part of that process for sure. And not just the person going through that, but their partner and the children themselves,
When if they're too young to understand, it's bad for that reason, and if they are older and can understand, then it's bad for that reason. Like there's no good version, right?
Yeah, if it's happening in the home, though, I mean, this is being able to speak to, if you become trusted within that family or group, whatever it is, unit, then you're able to take moments, even if it's a few, to speak one-on-one with, a child or a grown child. And just, it's really about keeping things moving, how do I put this? Making sure that folks are getting a chance to speak what is happening out. And so things do not get stuck. But, I can only offer that space. You're not trying to psychoanalyze or force anybody to speak that's not ready, but it's opening spaces, opening the door for folks to be able to speak as they would like.
Do people ask you about the afterlife? Do you have children coming up to you and asking you where mommy is going?
I mean, people, I ask them what they think. Okay. I ask them, what do you think? And you have a conversation. I'm not going to answer that for them. I have my own things that I come with into this work, but it is not my job to...
You're the ferryman.
Figure that out.
Carry the information. The afterlife.
Yeah. So it's, it's holding space. It's holding space. It's asking questions. It's asking them to tell me a story, but it's to keep the space open and as peaceful as possible. And again, it's different in every case. I mean, sometimes it's a matter of sitting quietly, listening to music and turning over the pages of a book and making some tea and just being there and in the space, and not focusing on the subject matter at all, just being.
Yeah. I mean, it is a weird way normal. I think you and I had a conversation, and I have a good friend back from my Budapest life, who lost both of her parents by the time she was, I think, 35. And I remember we were both living in London at the time, and we were just going for a walk. And I had this moment, and I was like, look, it's obviously a great tragedy, and I'm sharing your grief, but you also need to understand that, one of the reasons why you're feeling so alone with this is because this used to be a completely normal experience, but by age 35, most people have lost both of their parents,
right? And
it's only kind of a historical anomaly or statistical weirdness that today this is a rare experience. And she actually kind of took comfort in the realization that this is, in some weird ways, the normal way of things going.
Absolutely.
And it's the other way around, that like King Charles losing his mom when he's 80 years old is the weird thing.
It is.
That's rare and weird. But you mentioned pain, and to me, another important kind of division line here, or inequality, is pain, and how much pain a certain form of death promises to this person, right? And I wonder what your views on that are, and whether you have any clients or have had any clients who wanted to speed it up and get it over with. Either pain or because of what you mentioned, the being a financial burden or in some other sense. And what do you do then?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And obviously it's one that's very much in the air right now. And it seems to be a question a lot of people are asking. And yes, I think this goes through people's minds naturally. Like, I hope this goes quickly, or I would prefer this to, go quickly. It depends on a lot of things. I mean, first of all, legally in New York, you cannot hasten. You cannot. Medical aid in dying is not legal in New York. There are ways that you cannot prolong the life and perhaps even hasten death with voluntary stopping eating and drinking. That is something that some people decide to go through.
That they stop eating to die.
Well, yes. See,
like a hunger strike almost. There's a character in the corrections who does this.
Yes. So, your relationship with food changes naturally as you go through the dying process, and you do stop eating most of the time. The general pattern is you stop eating and even stop drinking liquids. You may have, your mouth washed out and a few drops, but the body is beginning to shut down. And so that's a natural process that you are not eating and drinking at the end if you left things to their own devices. Now, there is, you can decide, there's all this legal stuff around it, but you can decide, I would like to not eat or drink, and I want help and support in helping me not eat or drink at a certain point. You can look it up and read all about it. I'm not going into the legalities of it now, but that is a decision that folks can make at a certain point. It's difficult for some people very much. And so there's a lot, if you're, you have to be sure that you want to do that. Family members, might find it difficult, but that's one way that people may decide to hasten the end. That is a possibility. But yeah, I mean, first of all, wanting to end things because of pain, physical pain, there are some cases that are, of course, there's awful pain, right? And it can be managed, but sometimes can't. I have not been around a lot of that myself. I have been around people that are in pain and that it's able to be managed in the home or at the end with morphine and with other medications that help. And so a lot of the time, the thing that people are most wanting to avoid is the aspect of losing their autonomy, losing their ability to do certain things they can't imagine not being able to do, like being able to, go to the bathroom by yourself and imagine yourself having to be helped in that way. These things just feel like, no, I don't want to get to that point. And so I think there is an element of not
dignity. It's not even just
it's an element of dignity. And so, it brings up this question of dignity and what it means. What does it mean? What is human dignity? These are huge questions. And I know you have conversations with philosophers all the time. So you have these kind of conversations, but it brings up very big questions about what does it mean to be a human? And does autonomy trump everything else? And what, how do we deal with this question? And
reminded of the Tony Judd, the historian, has this piece that I think was the last thing he didn't even write it. He just dictated it to somebody called Knight. He had an MS. Last period, he was completely unable to move, even even to blink. And that's a fascinating account of that, from being like a prisoner of your own body, but with your consciousness intact.
Yes. I had a client who had ALS, and I was with her for the last year and a half. And this, she's an amazing, amazing woman. And, she wanted to know if there are ways, and yet, we're in New York, and so no. But she was incredible. I mean, these are very big questions. I think, I believe this is the way the world is going. I think MAID will be passed. That will be available in New York eventually. It's already available in different states. Lots of legality.
Canada famously and scandalously, even for just mental illness, right? That was quite a scandal.
Yeah. Yes. And so I think, honestly, I think the whole role of the end of life doula, I think there are people that really specialize in people that have decided that's what they want to do and will come alongside. And I think it's got some elements to it that are very, very different. And I personally, my energies are going towards those that don't have folks around them at all, unhoused, and also those that are wanting support as they walk right the way through the whole process naturally. Yeah.
Or as naturally as our medical world.
Exactly. And that being part of it is pressing pause on things and saying, if you do this, then that it's possible this would be, this is the results of that kind of treatment. What do you think about that? And, having those conversations and encouraging those but listen, those kind of conversations are best had before anything like this ever happens. Like having conversations with your friends in community about, the sort of landscape of death and dying right now in the country, what it looks like, how you can just simply get more and more curative measures. And it's very difficult sometimes to decide, what, I think I don't want any more. Or maybe after this, let's take stock and make decisions. Realizing that you can decide those things if you wish, and sort of preparing yourself, thinking for yourself, what is most important? What are things that matter to me that I want to be able to do and take care of in my last days, if I find out that these indeed are my last days. Like in some ways you're given a chance to decide how to live those last days fully and take care of some of these things that maybe you need to take care of with your friends, with your relations. Yeah.
And especially because if somebody dies unexpectedly, then you're leaving your loved ones with uncertainty and maybe even conflict.
Right.
Would have wanted if you don't actually,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think nobody wishes that on their relatives and loved ones too.
That's right. And you can only, it's not a one and done conversation, right? Say we're talking about, talking about this before the time comes, thinking about it for yourself first is good pre-work before you start talking to anybody else, because you feel the gravity of it, right? And then you can go towards, perhaps if you're talking about a parent or a loved one, ask them, do you want to talk about it? Bring it up and then let it go and then bring it up again. It's like, an ongoing kind of conversation.
So the last and probably related kind of form of inequality, but inequality is a bad word here. It's more like a division line that might be drawn between two groups of people would be whether an atheist dying and a religious person dying are very different business altogether in your experience. Is anybody an atheist in the moment of their death? I like to say that, even the biggest new atheist probably says, oh my God, when he's getting blown, it's probably the same way when you're on a crashing airplane or in the moment of your death. If you had any inclination to become religious, it might be in that moment. So how do you feel about that? And are there moments when it's actually more difficult with a religious person? Step out of their dogma or whatever in that last moment?
I think I can speak of two examples, one of whom was a person that all I could say is he knew where he was going because of his beliefs and was at peace with that and it was remarkable. I hadn't been around somebody like that actually before, because it's not a given. You may believe, you may think there's something after, and yet you've never done this before. And, you really haven't. None of us have. None of us have. So
you're first. And there, as Kundera would say, there's no rehearsal. It's it's straight into production.
Right. Yes. And so, but this man, he actually, I think, was preparing. He was one of the unhoused guys. And just the way that we ended up working together and found each other was remarkable. And his daughter, who had been estranged from him from 7 years, ended up coming back into his life. I mean, it was incredible. So he, I think, had surrendered himself in a way to God, who in whom he believed, and was sort of letting the pieces come together as they would. And he was taken care of physically. He had a great place to be. So things were, the care around him was marvelous. So he was not stressed about these things, and was at peace in himself as to what was going on and where he was going. But I think there are folks that absolutely hold to what they believe to be true, and that there is nothing after this, and I'm simply going to sleep, and there is nothing more. And yet, leading up to that time, you're looking for meaning, right? We all do. It's a human. We need to know that we have had some meaning in this life, and people tend to do it in lots of different ways. In their accomplishments and their children and their sometimes in the things they've acquired because of the stories those acquisitions tell about their life and where they were.
We're here, right?
Yeah.
We were here. Fingerprints on the cave wall.
Yes.
The witness that I wasn't here.
That's right.
Nothing.
Yeah. And we can sit with them and be there saying, yes, we are looking at you. We are not turning away. We're bearing witness to your life. You are a beautiful human being, and you matter because you are. That's what Cicely Saunders, who started hospice, used to say. You matter because you are. And that's it.
That's beautiful. As we close our conversation, during which I learned so much from you. Thank you so much, Emma, for being here. Let's just talk a little bit about the last moment and what the doula does in the actual sacred moment of a soul departing. What happens then with you, and of the family and that enormous grief that follows. But also I always ask my guests, and I think we can kind of tie it nicely into this question. I ask all my guests, like, if it's 2030 and we look back 6 years from now on 2024, what will be something in 2030 that people will have understood that we don't yet know? And I would love to see if, as we talk about this final moment, whether there's something about it that you think we are at least awakening to. And it might be obvious, at least to a few more people during the next, or it will become obvious to more people in the next 6 years.
That's a great question. I must say, in that final moment, okay, so often what happens is there's one person or, a lot of people in the room, and you need to wait because you're waiting to see if there will be another breath. Sometimes there is, but then it becomes clear that's it. And there is a very special time, and everyone can feel it in different ways when it's clear that this person has now died, and yet they're still here in a strange way. And you can have people think all different things about this, but their body is there. They still hold dignity. And so often what happens, and this can be thought about beforehand, people occasionally like to do a last act of care for their person. Perhaps it's some scented water and warm cloths, ritual washing of just hands or face or hair, just some last act of care in taking care of the body and thanking that body for all the work that it has done. Beginning the letting go by caring for the physical body of the person. That's one of my favorite things to be able to do with people if they want to. And then sometimes, so anyway, I guess tidying up the room,
There's
presenting.
something about the forehead, right? Like when you're there with somebody dying,
Yeah.
touch the forehead
Mhm.
and the hands. And I thought about that, like what is
Yeah.
the forehead that's like how this person, that's how we enter the world. I mean, most of
Right.
us through our foreheads, but also there is, it's almost more important than the eyes, right? Especially if the eyes
Right.
are closed.
Yes, there's something going on, and yeah,
I don't know enough about the third eye and the chakras, but there must be something there.
I think so. I think so. Yeah, there's a beautiful caring gesture which is so innate in us, right? For children, of sweeping the hair away from the face, of stroking the hair back from the forehead, from touching the hands, and then putting the person in a position that is comfortable, relaxed, and pleasant in some ways, mouth shut, eyes shut, and tidying the room, asking the family to go, making it neat, having it the way the person has said they would like. Perhaps there is a candle, whatever, and then people can come back in and sit as they would like with the person for as long as they like. There's no rush to call anybody. You don't have to rush that moment. That's something I think I want everybody to know, is you can take your time before you call the funeral home and have time with your person, because it's a very special time. It really is. And I think it can really help everyone to understand, realize what just happened to some degree, accept this has happened, be with it together before having to say the big goodbye of the physical body leaving the space. That's, at home. But I think the big thing for me, Anna, is that the 2030 looking back, I think by 2030, I'm sure statistics say that, there's more people 65 and older than 18 and younger. It's the first time in history, right? Apparently, American history, maybe all history, I don't know. So the gray tsunami, the silver tsunami, gray wave. I think we're recognizing, and I hope by then we will look back and realize we grew to know more and more how much we are needed in each other's lives in a physical way. Turning up in person. It's sort of part of my whole sort of mission is that we remember, and I really mean that as feeling it in our members, remembering, not just up here, but in here, how to be with each other.
Our limbic system.
Yes, at this stage of life before we die. And are not afraid to walk in, knowing nothing, but just to be there and to ask questions and, better than that, learn a little before it hits so that you are able to be prepared and support others at this time of life.
Emma, you're doing the Lord's work. Whatever that means to anybody here listening to us or watching us. I do think that there's something that we forgot as humanity, and you're helping us remember. And I hope that more and more people will be familiar with your work, not just because everybody needs a death doula, but because we all are the death doulas.
That's right. Thank you. Yes.
Moments specialized to this as a beautiful profession, but the same way as we're all kindergarten teachers sometimes in our lives,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. I wish we didn't need them. It's this kind of thing. If you know what I mean, it's like let's remember together so that it's just that there's a gap. That's what this role is. It's filling a need. It's bridging a gap.
Wounding people. But I can imagine that even just people who are there with you as the loved ones of their person, how you so beautifully put it, will be able to face their own mortality maybe with more confidence and courage and humility because they saw you with their person. And often just seeing another human who is not a Gandalf, is not a superhuman, is just Emma in a
Right.
like in real sense of the word. And you think, oh, okay, it's great to have a third party here, a mediator almost, who's not part of the family, who's not a medical professional. It's good to have the doulas as well during birth. I hear for this reason, even if somebody has like plenty of sisters and people to come in, it's good to have a semi-stranger there.
That's right.
Because you might be more honest about certain things with them. There's no history. But that a lot of this can be done by any of us.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much. This has been a truly special episode, and I hope that it will get to a lot of people and help them, just become more conversant with this important topic. If not, I don't want to say dealing with it, because it's neither good or bad. It's just a fact.
It is a fact. I mean, there is a
conversation that we have to enable to happen about it.
Yeah, it's wisdom, right? It's being capable with the realities of life, competent with realities of life. Yeah.
We all have a lot to learn there. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Anna.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.